Good afternoon. I'm here with Sean Callahan, who is the CEO for Catholic Relief Services. And unlike some of my guests, I actually personally know some of Sean, your history, because Sean and I started more or less at the same time at Catholic Relief Services back in the 80s, the late 80s, right, Sean?
That's right, 30 years ago.
30 years ago. And I know that you were, amongst other things, the country rep in Nicaragua, in India. Were you the director or vice president for HR? I don't remember what your title was.
Yes, the head of HR.
The head of HR and other things that I don't know and I can't remember. And now, so you were the COO or the chief of staff to the former CEO, and now you recently, the last 2 years?
Correct.
Have been the CEO. So congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Since I know you, I think that was an excellent choice. So I'm glad that you're at the helm there at my beloved Catholic Relief Services. And
Thank you very much.
So to get started, I already outed what your background was, but what anything that you think you'd like to add about your background that you think would be important for people to understand or interesting for people to understand about how you got from there to here?
No, I think I came from one of these traditional Northeastern Irish Catholic backgrounds, but I think one of the things that probably tied me in a little bit to this type of work was I had an aunt and uncle who were both Maryknoll missionaries out in the field. My uncle was in what was Formosa at the time in the Philippines, and my aunt in Central America. So as a kid, we used to have visits of people who had been overseas and seeing, airplanes land on little pads in Guatemala and people clearing jungle space so that they could reach people. So did see some to something.
That's interesting. So it's not like you're doing your year
exactly.
service.
I happened to be finishing up at the Fletcher School, and someone came from CRS for the internship, and they said, "How about giving something back?" And I said, "Yeah, I should give back a year." And then soon the year turned into 30, as we just mentioned.
And what do you think kept you staying? Maybe it changed over time. I don't know. What keeps you there?
Yeah, I think probably the most important thing is the values and the mission of what we do is trying to be a support to local people and assist them. And so it's really, many of us have been blessed with either resources or history. And I think trying to share some of those blessings with others would be probably number one on the mission. I'd say number two would be fantastic colleagues that I've had throughout the history here at CRS. So working together with great people and doing this type of great work, and frankly, seeing the substantial change that we've been able to be a part of has been exciting. So I don't know any other field where we've had such great successes in reducing poverty and assisting people to take control of their own lives than we have. And I think that narrative doesn't get out enough, but I think it's one of the things that attracts many of us to doing this type of mission.
So those are just the two things, colleagues and some of the things you're proud of. Can you name like one of the, tell us a story about one of the things the changes you've seen that you're particularly proud of?
As I look at colleagues and things we're proud of, I have a colleague who was working in South Sudan, and two people came on a flight and they ended up getting off at the wrong airport and got off one in which they were in the minority, and some of the local people rounded them up and were going to kill them, actually. And my colleague, she stepped in and said, "This doesn't make sense, you shouldn't do this," and pleaded with the colonel at the time, and he said, "Well, I have to bring them to the general." And so she walked in the bush for 2 days with the colonel and these two gentlemen, and made her case to the general, who then spared their lives. And she stayed there and made sure that they got to another area of the country where they would be safe. And so, here's someone who probably violated most of our security practices, but did it to save the life of two other colleagues that were working in this type of area. And so just seeing that type of commitment and dedication from people in South Sudan, in Central America, in Asia, is just something that I think continually impresses me and inspires me to continue in this work.
And that's a story I had not heard, and I could see why that would be so inspiring. And it reminds me, after the big tsunami that hit Indonesia and East Timor and Sri Lanka, how everyone in the international community, but I know CRs particularly, was flat out, went away for months at a time in very difficult, very, very challenging, sad situations to be helpful. And that, to me, is another inspiring aspect of the international work that I find amazing.
Yeah, I don't think we hear enough of what people put into this and what they give. I happened to go to South Sudan to meet this colleague, and I met her 6 weeks after she had given birth to another child. And so here she was trucking through the bush, early in her pregnancy, which none of us knew about, but did it to protect someone else. And so we see people doing that, uprooting themselves constantly and going to these different places, and then really working closely with those local communities and trying to be part of them, and basically share their talent, their resources, and their love for people worldwide. I think it's just something that helps make it a better world.
So I'm imagining that when you get drained or downed, which anybody would at times, that it's those kind of things that keep you going. Would that be a true statement?
It would be. I think just to reflect again on our reasons for being down, and to think of what other people have been through, is incredible. I always go back to early in my career when I was in Nicaragua and going to the Atlantic coast. I happened to be driving in a Jeep, and the bishop was driving, and all of a sudden a little tuna fish can went across in the muddy road in front of us, and he screeched to a halt. And all of a sudden, a little boy who was butt naked peeked around the building, ran out and grabbed the tuna can and ran back. And I said, wow, why would you stop for a tuna can? And he said, because that's their pots to cook in. And if I crushed it, they might not have anything to cook in. So I keep thinking back to that of what are my problems and what are the things that get me down? And then to see how other people make, do or celebrate life with so much less than we have. And so, kind of puts things in perspective.
Sean, what are the things that you find draining in your job? And then what antidotes or advice would you give to yourself or others about those things?
Probably the toughest thing is losing colleagues. I would say is the toughest thing in this job. And unfortunately, over the last year, we've had several incidents where violence has taken the lives of some of our colleagues, or they didn't receive adequate medical care at different times. And I would say that's just tough, But I am, again, inspired when I meet or talk to the families. We had some colleagues who were killed in Afghanistan, and I went out to meet with the families of them. Another colleague from the United States who also died in Afghanistan, and my communication with the parents, just to see how those families all believe in the same mission that we do and are in 100%. That just kind of re-energizes me that we're doing the right thing in the right way, and that our colleagues have presented that to people outside of our organizations really exemplifies the pride that they have in their work. And so those type of things do energize me and help pick me up when I'm down, seeing some of the adversity that others have gone through with such grace.
Thank you for sharing that, and I can hear or see the emotion in you, and you're even talking about it. And to carry that weight, how many staff does CRS have now? 2,000?
Probably 2018, our fiscal year, we lost close to 10 staff members, some by violence, and then some by car accidents and health issues.
So I can imagine that weighs on you. That's always with you. The strategy, we got to get the good strategy. We got to get in the money. And you're still carrying the weight of all these people.
Yeah, that's the toughest, I would say, and just the security of others. We need to make sure that if we put people in areas where they could be in harm's way, that we're making sure that we're doing things right and we're maximizing the time and investment of these people that are in those areas. So, I just came back from Nigeria, and we have a bunch of colleagues up in the northeast where it's a Boko Haram area and very difficult, and met with the U.S. government and the Nigerian government, and they're talking about some of the challenges they have up in those areas. And I was asking them about security, and then I met with some of our team that are working up in those areas, and I think they feel very comfortable with the way things are. But it is something that day in and day out, it's always in the back of your mind in these positions. Are we taking good enough care and protecting our staff enough?
And you're dependent on other people, that they're your security people, your staff on the ground. Your control over that is only so much. Right?
It is, but I think one, if people see that I come out to these areas and then value their input, I think that's crucial, that they know that I'm trusting them and counting on them. And I think it's important that everyone knows the value that our agency, our board, and our supporters put on everyone's life. And I think people can feel that. And so I'm hopeful that everyone takes the appropriate measures. And I would say in most of the cases I've seen that's been true. So it is easier to trust people. One, when you have really good professionals who know what's going on. Second, people who are integrated in the community, so they get that good advice from the local communities. And then that they know that we're behind them no matter what decision that they make, whether they think people need to be pulled out or not. But as you well know, the people who are often as the greatest threat and the people that we lose more often than not are people from the countries where we serve. Some of our colleagues in South Sudan who were killed were actually in their villages, and a raid occurred in the evening there. So it wasn't directly related to their work, but still it's just as harsh when they're taken from you.
So that causes me to wonder, you're in the hot seat now, and God willing, you will be for many years. And what would you, what, I don't know if it's, what advice would you give, what do I want to say? I was going to say, what advice would you give your younger self? Let's start there. So if you looked back at your younger self, the things that you believed or thought were important, or were you focused, or worried about even, what advice, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give yourself back in the day?
Back in the day, I would probably give two pieces of advice. The first thing would be to not be afraid to follow your values and to stick with your values. I think when we compromise our values, we have regrets. When we don't compromise our values, no matter what happens, at least we feel like we stood for something. And I think other people see that, feel that, and know that. So I think that's crucial. The second thing I would say is to be patient. I think I was in maybe too much of a hurry, and I think it's not just getting to the top of the mountain, it's enjoying the climb. And I think I would recommend that people take that time to enjoy the climb, learn on their on their way up. I think if you perform well, people will see it and recognize it, and you'll be there. But don't be, I think in this country, we have a tendency of being in too much of a hurry. And I think sometimes we miss out on learnings and relationships if we are in that hurry. And so take your time, learn, get everything out of, all the juices out of every fruit that you're exposed to, so that you can really use that later on in your career.
So what would that look like? I love that, taking your time, getting all the juices out. What does that look like? Does it mean doing less? Does it mean spending more time with people as opposed to being transactional? What do you think that means?
You know, in our context, I think is really getting to know your local environment, the people and the cultures more. That it's not about coming into a place and writing a project or doing a program. It's understanding the people, getting to know them, and figuring out how you can plug in to contribute to the tremendous resources that local people provide in the areas we're in. I think if sometimes you come in and you're a little too fast and you have all the answers, then you miss a lot of the richness of the resources that are there locally. So it's really to come in and have an appreciative inquiry. An example I could give you is I was in a village in India, and we arrived there, and when I had visited there once before, all the women were inside their huts and we spoke to a group of men. But this was 3 years later, and as we came into the community and got out of our vehicles, I was noticing that the men were bringing out these plastic mats, and the women were coming out and sitting on the plastic mats. And so we were going to be sitting in front of the women, so they were no longer in their houses. They were now out with us participating. And one woman came up and said, "It's so wonderful to have you people here. You know, you're so intelligent. You've come from so far away. You bring such resources. We're really blessed in our community to have you here." And I said, "Well, what do you do?" And she said, "I'm a traditional birth attendant here." And I said, "How many children have you given birth to in this area?" And she said, "Well, over the last year." And I said, "Yeah." And she said, "About 80. And I said, "You know how many children I've assisted in their birth over the last year?" And she looked at me and said, "How many?" And I said, "None." And so she looked at me and I said, "So who's the expert here, you or me?" And she kind of smiled, you know, sheepishly. But I said, "You know, we might be here to bring you some new techniques or things, but you are really the expert." And I think recognizing the expertise of local communities, helping build their esteem in front of the communities, is something that we can do and should do a little bit more. And I think when we start learning that a little bit more, then I think as we progress in our career, we really recognize the contributions that everyone can make, even though those contributions may be a little different from what we had planned or different from what we had expected, but we can still find a way that they can contribute to the mission.
And isn't it letting go? So I'm imagining you're talking about the professional staff, mostly international, and isn't it letting go a bit on advancing in your career then? Because you also said know that you will be recognized for your work. And I do a lot of work with international organizations overseas, and what I hear a lot from the national staff is that staff come in too supercharged. This is the way we're going to do it. I got to make a name for myself. I got to be known. I got to be seen. That's the way they're perceived anyway. God bless their souls. That's not what they're trying to do. So I feel like I'm hearing from you to slow that down or flip it. You know, make that your secondary thing.
Exactly. I think, again, if we take a little time to listen and see and not be blinded by knowing everything when we came into a particular situation, I think it's kind of like when I graduated from college or close to it, I knew pretty much everything. And each year I find out how little I actually know as I get older and older. And I think that's the type of experience that people have a tendency of rushing in and thinking we know the answers when the answer may already be there. We just have to reveal it to the local community. And it doesn't have to be our answer. It may be a different answer, but if we don't even take a look to see it, we won't find it.
So for me, that comes out as, I'm just taking a note, collaborative leadership. And it doesn't mean just leadership of your team. It's like leadership of what the whole project, everything that you're doing, it is collaborative. So that's the label I'm putting on that.
Sure. I think probably the most misplaced word in the development field is partnership. And I'm not sure what that means to everyone, but I think when I look at Catholic Relief Services, for instance, I don't see us as necessarily an international humanitarian and development agency, but I see us as a relationship agency. Mm-hmm. And it's really those relationships that make us effective or not. We're invited into the country by the local church and the local government in most cases, and then by local communities. So if we don't have a relationship with them, if we're not contributing to making them better, then we should be out of there. And oftentimes they will say, hey, if this isn't moving us forward, why are you actually here? And so we do have those type of conversations. And so to me, it's not that the relationships are part of it. I think the relationships are the focus. And then if we have those relationships, then when we can expose them to expertise, talents, and other things that may help them better their own lives. But if we start thinking that we're going to improve their own lives, then I think that's a little bit of hubris that probably won't help our mission in the long run and probably won't help the local community as well.
And how do you inculcate, you, Sean, CRS with that understanding or that culture?
So I really think, as we look at Catholic Relief Services, what I'd like to see is a culture of being bold yet humble. And when I talk about that, I think we all have to mirror that and represent it. And so when I was leaving the building last night and it was snowing, out and all, and I saw one of our staff members, who's the guy Clifford, who ends up cleaning our walkways and putting the salt out. And I just stopped to talk to him and said, Cliff, are you going to be working late tonight? And what are you doing? And he said, oh, I've already been out there putting the salt and I'm getting ready for things going. And just recognizing everyone along the way who contributes to your mission, and you not being, as a leader, not being stuck in the clouds, but into the daily work of people. So this gentleman who helps us get into the building in the morning so that we can reach out to people, clearly the drivers in our programs as we work around the world, that they get us to where we go safely, despite security issues or dangerous terrains and things like that. Those are the type of things. So one, it's me representing it when I go out to the field, but it's also showing and expressing concern for everyone in developing those relationships inside the organization. So first thing I do in the morning is I look to see whose birthday it is today around the world, and I send them a little note to say, happy birthday, hope you do something special. And I think people just feel like, wow, somebody's taking some time to recognize me, and that's important and a value. And then I am hopeful that when I meet and talk to them, when they express that appreciation, I said, I hope you're doing that for your colleagues or the people we're serving. You're taking that extra time to be with them. And so I think it does tie back into our earlier conversation about rushing through things. It is really developing those relationships with people. And I think we as leaders need to model that, because people are always watching, and they will understand what we do more than what we say. And so I think we have to demonstrate it.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I also know you also touched on values earlier, and now you brought up be humble, be bold, which we were talking about that yesterday, and I love the be humble, be bold. And you were telling me yesterday about how that's, if I remember correctly, one of the values for Catholic Relief Services. be humble, be bold. I don't know if you said it exactly that way. It's just my favorite way of saying it.
No, it is. As I mentioned, I think there's a lot of great leaders that have that. And so we try to represent that. And, being Catholic Relief Services, it's nice to look at faith leaders who do that. So, I had the opportunity of working with Mother Teresa in Calcutta, and she was certainly very bold, but also very humble. I remember the first time that I met her, we had a little private meeting, and I was sitting next to her, and she was saying, "Oh, thank you. CRS was one of the first organizations that assisted us." And I said, no, Mother, it's us who should be thankful to just be associated with the work, you do on behalf of the poor. And she said, "Shh, don't spoil it." And I thought it was rather interesting. She did not want to have the recognition or the credit. She was doing it for the people and not for the recognition. And I think most of the people that work for us do it for the mission as opposed for the recognition. And so I think that continues to permeate the agency.
And what do you do when when be humble, be bold, relationship first isn't, you see it not happening? How do you deal with that, either in an individual or a department, or what do you do? Because that's the tricky part, right? One is being the guiding light and the sun that shines everywhere. But what do you do when you're not getting to the dark shadows? And forgive me to the people who are in the dark shadows. It just happens sometimes.
Sure. I think I think the being humble part is probably sometimes a little more difficult for some people, because I think if you've given up so much and you sacrifice and you contribute to something and you achieve something, oftentimes, many of us would like somebody to know about it and some success. And so what we try to do is make sure that we recognize that within the agency and that we have ample opportunities for recognition. I think sometimes because our problems that we're trying to solve are often so large that we sometimes forget to celebrate. And so what we've done at CRS is the last 3 years that we've done a employee engagement survey. So all of our employees can say what's working well and what's not. And so the first thing is, one, listening to people. But the second thing is we've noticed that we may not have been recognizing people enough. And so it's making sure that people know that they're being recognized. And that might be a little spot award where we call somebody out. It may be that we, buy them a pizza for lunch and get together. It might be that we, talk to them about future job possibilities and things of that nature, or it might be the overall employee recognition award. And so I think when people see that they're being recognized, we also have a program where colleagues nominate other colleagues for these awards, and so that it's not coming from an executive office, but it's actually coming from their colleagues on the ground who recognize them. I think then more and more that culture develops where people see it. If someone doesn't feel that, then frankly, they might be in the wrong agency. But before we give up on them, we really try to explain and give people the opportunity to let someone else shine and see, and try to give them that experience that by helping someone else shine, maybe they are shining as well, and that people are noticing. And so I will talk to people at different levels and say, you did a great job here. Could you have done it this way? And I often find that someone tries it that way, and when it's successful, I'll go back to them and I'll say, I noticed what you did, and I'm really proud of you. That was fantastic. And I think they feel that validation. But I also recognize it when it didn't work. And I said, this is the risk of what we did. I saw what you did. I agreed with it, but it was an absolute failure. But thanks for trying. And I think they then also can feel that they're on the right track and that they're in the right agency for them.
Thank you. You touched on failures, which I wanted to get to. That's one of my favorite questions. But I also wanted to say, just the way you're describing your style, it's very hands-on, or there's a lot of your DNA all over the place, that you're very, at least you try to be very aware of what's happening with people, who you need to touch base with. Seems like must take a lot of your time. That must a lot of your time and energy and focus. That's a lot of people to be paying attention to.
It does take a lot of time, but frankly, I think it's much more important for me actually to know that our photographers has a son named Liam, as opposed to me knowing how to take pictures. And so what I find is crucial is I let go and let the experts be the experts. But I want to make sure that everyone knows that I value their contribution to the agency. And so I try to find something out about them. I would say one of the things that I feel good about in the agency is many people, feel like I either know them or know their name. And I went to a country program one time and met about 150 people. And this woman came up and said, "Do you remember my name? I hear that you remember everyone's name." And I said, to be honest with you, when I met the 150 and everyone said their name, I didn't realize everyone's name, but I said, I will now remember yours because you asked me, So it is kind of those type of things, but I don't spend my time learning and doing other people's jobs. I see it my job to make sure that my staff have what they need. And if what they need is my engagement and my recognition of them, then I'll do all I can to do that at different levels. And I can't do that around the world, but I just wrote a note out to different country programs, and I mentioned my recent visit to Nigeria and what the people in the country program had done. So I'm hopeful that others of our 7,000 staff around the world will see that message about Nigeria, and they will feel part of that because it was Nigeria. And, last year when I visited Afghanistan or Burkina Faso or Guatemala or Mexico, that each of them get a recognition like that, and they can see themselves in the work we do in different places and that recognition.
Thank you. I'm very much appreciating this interview with you, because you are so in this discussion, you're so relationship focused, and that is a first in the interviews that I've done. Not that other people don't talk about it, but it's so, at least that's what's coming up so much right now. And I think I like that is being seen, that this is a leadership style, and that you're showing what we're talking about, what that looks like. So I just wanted to pull that out, perhaps not so much for you, Sean, as for others that are going to be watching this. One thing I want is for people to be able to take the nuggets from different leadership styles and see what works for them. And you're doing a lovely job showing a relationship, one that's very focused on relationships. I wanted to also ask you about failure. What is your relationship with failure? You mentioned it when you suggested something to someone and it fails. You go, oh, okay, well, it failed. So how do you deal with your own failure? How do your view of it when others fail? Because, in our culture, we so try to avoid failure, and we can go a narrow path because we're trying not to fail, as opposed to a wide path that we may fail, but at least we're innovating. So what do you have to say about that?
That to me, that is a real tough one. I must say, in my upbringing, we were supposed to succeed, and we were supposed to be, top in our class, and we were supposed to do those things. So I must say, failure is always a challenge. But I think there's two things that I would say related to failure. I think the first one is, and it goes back to my original comments of some of the things that are important. And I think that if we're true to our values and we do things, then failure is often a more minor issue than if we abrogated our values in a certain way. And so I think seeing the values and what we need to do and the demands that we have to take risks. And frankly, in being in the C-suite, there's a lot more risks than I realized. And I think you can be subjected to failure in so many different ways. And so I would just say in that case, it really is being true to yourself and your values so that you can do that. I had a failure where I applied for the CEO position before I was nominated for this time and didn't get it, and then was there as the deputy to the CEO who ended up receiving it. And I think she was probably a little uncomfortable with her competition than, being there. And for me as well, everybody in the agency knew it was between the two of us and, how some of the voting went, and they went through a few extensions on who was going to be. And so I think having a humbling experience and people seeing that, I put the agency ahead of myself, and frankly, seeing my supervisor at the time and telling her, this is my recommendation that you do, for the agency and for you. And she got a little emotional and said, why are you doing this? And I said, because it's good for CRS and it's good for the people we serve. And I think, she valued that as well. I think on an agency front, I see it a little differently. And I see the most difficulty we have is failing fast. So I think there's one failure is personal, and how do we represent that? But then as an agency, and when I say failing fast, it is that we recognize that pushing this stone up the hill isn't going to get us to where we want to go. And it's very difficult for an agency like ours because we do things and our people are out there to make something happen no matter what. And so it doesn't matter how difficult, it doesn't matter how dangerous, we're going to do this. And if we thought of a certain methodology and it doesn't work, they'll use some other methodology. Now, that might not be the best approach. And sometimes we have to come in and say, hey, this isn't working, let's do something else. But we have ingrained in people that they're going to push that stone until they get it up the hill. And eventually they would get it up the hill. But I think we as an agency fail if we don't fail fast and assist people in getting off tracks that aren't immediately effective, because there's so much work to be done. We have to really steward our resources well, and we have to tell them that even though they're doing this and we know they'll get it, it's not an effective use of resources, and we have to take a different approach. And so at times I have had to, I have celebrated that probably the most important thing I've done in headquarters was kill 2 or 3 big systems projects because they weren't going to where we needed them to go. They were taking up too much time and all. And so to kind of celebrate that we made a mistake in trying to do this, but we're going to try it again in something else, I think people can then accept that they can take a risk, and they won't be, chastised or thrown out of the agency as long as they're communicating and doing it in the right way for the right goals of the mission.
And so part of then your job is to notice you yourself or your leadership when when you're shoving the rock up the hill and it's too much energy, it's not getting you where you want to go, and to pull the plug.
Exactly. One of my things, for instance, right now is in the development field. I feel like we have not gotten the narrative out on how successful development has been. And when I talk to people about the good old days, I tell them the good old days weren't. And they say, what does that mean? And I say, well, the good old days weren't as good as we thought they were. There were less children that were vaccinated, less children that got an education, less children that lived beyond the age of 5 years old. And we now have the opportunity of reducing poverty, reducing hunger, reducing malaria, reducing polio, and we've done great successes in there. And so we have had a very sporadic narrative that has gone out in the world, and so it has been very susceptible to other people capturing that narrative. And I think that as a community, we need to come together and share these values and these influences and this data that we can actually prove and show of the success of investments that people from wealthier countries have made. And not to pat everyone on the back, though I would pat them on the back for doing that. But then I think we also need to explain to people that if we use 25% of the world's resources, we should be giving something back to other people. And how can we contribute to that process? So I think we need, even as a community, to look at areas where we have actually failed to get that word out, to help people understand the contributions they've made and assist them in understanding that a little bit better, and letting people know that it's not just us who is doing this work, but them by contributing or supporting these efforts, they're just as much part of those efforts as well and contributing, to the well-being of womankind and mankind.
And that leads me to the question you and I talked about yesterday, which was how you were saying, how can we solve the world's problems and do it in a different way? How can we as a community come together and solve these problems? And you were telling me about the Nigeria example. Do you want to talk about that?
Sure. Our new strategy is really a strategy where we have to figure out new indicators and that our success is reaching people. Our success is not fulfilling a grant obligation or gaining more money for something. It's actually converting people into the type of programs or converting the type of operations that we have into ones that are reaching out to more and more people. So, as I mentioned yesterday, when I visited Nigeria, we had a meeting with the Minister of Health, and we had received a large grant that was destined for the government, but there were some stewardship issues and the government wasn't selected. And our team, hadn't had the opportunity to meet with the Minister of Health until I came. And when we met, there was a little nervousness on the team, but the Minister of Health said that they were down and out until CRS came along and lifted them up. And now they are ready to compete and prepare, and that our team on the ground really provided them with that opportunity to use these resources that they wouldn't have had and actually put them in a position to compete themselves. And I talked to our staff, and I was really proud of our staff, and our staff happened to be, the leadership group happens to be 3 women, 2 are of African, actually all 3 are of African origin, and they're leading one of our largest programs. And I think they were a little nervous because they hadn't had a meeting with the minister before my arrival on what he might say. But the fact that he said that they had pulled them in and pulled up the government of Nigeria, and the fact that the government of Nigeria will now look for a new grant, but they want CRS to be their partner in that, with the Global Fund, with the US government, with the World Bank. They could see that it's, again, not about us getting the resources, but us being a resource to others. And so I think in the development community, we have to start seeing that we are a resource in and of ourselves, and we can be that resource to others, and that we don't measure success by the resources that we gain, but by how much we can spread that resource to others and expand our touching of individuals in different ways, whether it be in healthcare and in employment or in empowerment or in promoting peace in different areas. And so I think we have to figure out how we change our indicators so that people see the realization that what they're actually measuring and looking at is the well-being of communities, not whether their project was successful or not.
And there's your call to action, isn't it?
Exactly.
We should write an article about that. Have you written an article about that?
I haven't, but I'm in the process of preparing this and to donors, to ask donors to participate in helping us develop indicators that are indicators for human dignity, that are indicators for well-being, so that we don't look at these other indicators. Earlier in my career, very early when we knew each other, I was in Nicaragua, and I went out to this small town called Bocana de Paiwas, and in central Nicaragua, and I had to take 2 donkeys to get there, and I met with the community, and we sat in a chapel which served as a chapel and a storage for some of the people. And we had given a loan to the community, and everyone said that they had repaid the loan, and they were so proud, this real campesino, poor community, but they were 100% repayment. And as I sat there and I was listening to different presentations, I turned to the person next to me and I said, who's got the worst land here? And they said, oh, Jose's family, they have terrible land. And I said, why do you say that? And he said, it's in a dry area, it's undulating land, it's not flat. They always have trouble planting and all. And I said, oh, that's great. So I went over and sat next to Jose's family, and after a while talked to them, and I said, so how was this project for you? And Jose and his wife were really happy. They said, we paid back everything. And I said, that's terrific. Thank you so much for paying back everything. That's great. The community's really together. What a great success. I said, but I hear your land isn't as good. How were you able to do that? And they said, well, we worked as hard as we could and all. And I said, but in your land, even if you worked as hard as you could, the produce probably wouldn't have. They said, no, you're right. That's true. So we had to sell off a few animals, and my kids worked for the next door neighbor and everything. And so they worked, but we did pay off the loan. And I said, that's incredible. You worked really hard, sold off some animals, and your kids worked, and you made it, and you made the project a success. And then later on, I turned to our staff and I said, so was this project a success if the assets of our clients are decreasing? And it was the type of thing where here we're looking at certain indicators that everything was repaid and the microfinance is still revolving and everything's going well when the assets of the community are decreasing. And so I think we really have to take a good look on what does it mean human dignity, what does it mean well-being, and how do we improve people's lives, and how do they feel that they are improved? And so what indicators should we measure? And so we haven't written about it yet, but we are trying to develop a proposal for one of our very close donors to be part of the development of a new way of measuring success in this field.
Well, we will be waiting to hear more about it so we can learn about it and we can spread the word. Obviously, what you do and what you learn from it is going to be useful for everyone. So I'm glad to know about it, and I look forward to hearing more.
Well, we're hopeful, and this is in line. Anything we do, we put out there for everyone, because we want to share the new advantages that we have with others. And people say, well, that's not a really smart business decision to share all these things. And whether it's our partnership principles or whether it's these indicators and things. And our comment back is, it is if we do want to change the world, we want others to also have the advantage of our experience, but then we want to outcompete them as well. So our whole thing is, let's not have an advantage. If I'm in a swimming race, I want to swim against the top swimmers. I don't want to swim against the B swimmers. So for us to do the right thing, we have to make sure that everybody is operating in our community at the highest level. And that, I think, helps all of us work harder, better, and frankly, those who are disadvantaged in the world deserve the best from all of us.
It gives me goosebumps. So we're at the end of our time. Are you good? Is there anything else that you haven't said that you'd like to share?
I guess just the final thing, as people are looking at leadership in this field and relationships in this field, I would just say that the most important thing that I think in development is trust. And that is that local communities trust us, our staff and colleagues trust us, and that we're, as I mentioned, true to our values, which assists us in that trust mechanism. And I found that we can actually prove that trust does work. And Catholic Relief Services was involved in AIDS relief in its early stages, and we worked in 10 different countries, and we're working in many areas. And we actually had better results than 3 of the other first-time partners in the AIDS relief program. that PEPFAR, the President's Emergency Program for AIDS Relief, had. And the donors didn't believe. They thought, well, this is a good faith-based organization. They must have made some mistakes with their numbers, so we'll send out another firm to investigate. And the firm went out there and investigated and came back and said, yes, their adherence rates are double the other adherence rates. And so they then sent them back out and said, find out why. And what they found was because local communities trusted the people. We didn't helicopter people in. It was people who knew the community, someone who had been there when somebody's father got sick and ill, when his wife was going to have a baby, when the drought occurred. And it was people who had been there during those toughest times. And when they came in and advised them on a protocol for responding to a disease, they were trusted. And that was the difference, that you come in from the outside, you can be as smart as you like, but if people don't trust you, they're not going to change their behavior. They need to try it out. People are very shrewd and very smart there. So I would just say, again, in line with the other comments that we made about taking your time and using your values, that those will add to a development of trust if you do development in a way that you put yourself out there and you show that you're respecting the local people and local individuals. And so we need to have that mutual trust, one, that we trust them, and two, that they trust us for us to be successful.
I'm glad that you brought that back up, and that we're finishing on that note. So Sean Callahan, CEO of Catholic Relief Services, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you. Good luck with this project.
Thank you.